Yes, give him a little applause. There we go.
Okay. The claim I'm responding to is corporal punishment mentally hurts children and encourages bad behavior. The advocate has 5 different secondary claims, the first being corporal punishment makes children distant to the parents, the second being that it makes them antisocial, the third being it makes them depressed and aggressive, the fourth being that it encourages bad behavior, and the fifth being that it causes low student academic scores. A little bit of a definition on corporal punishment. It's just physical punishment. That's both the dictionary definition and the definition that the speaker used. Corporal punishment, in response to the first claim, corporal punishment makes children distant to their parents. The speaker makes a point about how corporal punishment will cause children to avoid their parents and keep them from talking to them about their emotions. However, the cited evidence doesn't explain nor talk about how children will be afraid to talk to their parents, or anybody for that matter, about their emotions. The cited article only states in a singular sentence that, quote, children whose parents hit them regularly may develop more distant parent-child relationships later on. The sentence does cite a study conducted in 2001, and I looked it up in the library database and found that the study actually concluded that parent-child attachments can be promoted with, quote, high levels of supervision that enable consistent disciplinary practices to be maintained, which along with involvement and a lack of external disciplinary practices promotes the process of attachment between parents and children. That being said, the only way the speaker could have come to those conclusions is by simply jumping from the claim that her cited articles provides to the conclusions she drew. There is nothing beyond a singular sentence in an article that provides not only the grounds, but the entire claim she makes. Furthermore, her warrants are an elaborate endpoint, with the only concrete or cited point being her grounds, which is a singular sentence, blah, blah, blah. With all that in mind, it's more effective to argue that child neglect and the harsh extremes of corporal punishment causes children to distance themselves from their parents, not across the board corporal punishment. Response to the second claim, corporal punishment makes children antisocial. To find a challenge to the reasoning of this claim, one doesn't have to look further than the actual evidence that the speaker cited for this claim. In the article, it states that, quote, conditional spanking led to greater reductions in child defiance or antisocial behavior. And it goes on to explain that conditional spanking is, quote, a disciplinary technique for 2 to 6-year-old children in which parents use 2 open-handed spanks only after the child has defied milder discipline such as timeout. The fact that the cited article states that a form of corporal punishment can actually reduce antisocial tendencies speaks for itself. But I'll speak anyway. The speaker's warrants fault because the grounds used to jump to them doesn't actually point to those warrants. Again, it is severe corporal punishment, or simply child abuse, that can lead to antisocial behavior, not across the board corporal punishment. In response to the third claim that corporal punishment causes children to be more depressed and aggressive, first and foremost, I'll be quick to point out that this claim had no citation. However, it wasn't hard to look over the source that was claimed, It wasn't that hard to look over which source claimed that there was an association between corporal punishment and aggressiveness in children. After all, there were only 3 cited sources. The source in question, an article on the Bookings website, claims that it cites a 2002 meta-analysis of 27 studies, with a link attached to said quote, acting as the sole citation for the study. However, if you click the link, it redirects you to an error message saying that the page does not exist. Calling into question the entire validity of not only the source, but the entire claim could be nothing more than conjecture on the speaker's part. In response to the fourth claim, corporal punishment encourages bad behavior. The speaker says that children tend to get a temper a lot more when they receive corporal punishment. They cite the same source from the last claim in this claim. I don't see any difference between aggressiveness and bad behavior, so I find these 2 consecutive points to be redundant. Nevertheless, looking at the speaker's source, at no point during the article does it state anything that can help the speaker establish their warrant. It does not mention anything about the children's temper and how it relates to corporal punishment. This is important because without any grounds to your warrant, you're essentially just making conjecture. And finally, In response to the fifth secondary claim, corporal punishment causes low student academic scores. The cited evidence for this claim, an article from the website New Vision, says multiple things regarding how corporal punishment lowers student confidence, creates hesitation, and impedes class participation. However, it does not go into detail on these points. It simply says a study was conducted in 2011 in Pakistan, and that this study says it supports these points without elaborating on how corporal punishment causes all of these things. It doesn't even link to the said study. Did you also know that I found a study conducted in 2012 regarding corporal punishment that also states that it helps students remember right and wrong answers? I don't blame you if you didn't, because I just made that up. But it sounds legitimate because I said a study was conducted and then it relied on something that sounds within a reasonable doubt. And that's the problem with evidence of this nature. It's vague, it gives a couple buzzwords to drum up confidence, and it relies on practical knowledge in an effort to sound legitimate. With all that being said, this claim falls flat because the evidence used to support it isn't legitimate. So with all of that in mind, I believe that I've appropriately refuted this claim.
Aren't you glad to have that out of the way before the weekend?
Yes, I am.
All right. Thank you for sticking around a little bit. I'll go very quickly. Most of your responses have to do with analysis of the evidence that the advocate presented. You don't have any counterclaims of your own, which is okay, as long as you are consistent on these points, and I think that you did a good job suggesting that corporal punishment is being conflated with child abuse and hitting kids, beating them, and maybe that's not the term that you use, but it's like the same sort of term. And you suggest that, in fact, the research, when you look at the research in depth, especially on the first point, that it suggests that they can have a beneficial effect. I like that. I mean, in essence, it seems to deny the advocate's point completely. You do get into a couple of places where you were saying that basically the grounds, we've got the begging the question fallacy that's going on here, that in essence the only proof is the claim that somebody makes in the article that they are citing, but there's no research, there's no explanation, there's no documentation other than this is the person's opinion, and there might be some question about whether or not the authorities are appropriate on that. I did want to jump down to your third and your fourth point, which are based on that challenge of the evidence that is you can't find. It lists the meta-analysis, and you got that 404 error that you're talking about here. This is one of the problems with internet research that we've talked about. The internet is ephemeral. What was there once does not necessarily mean that it'll be there next time. But that also doesn't mean that it wasn't ever there. It just means that its location has changed. That's why you want to try and cite primary sources as best you can. I don't think that we want to jump to the inference that she just made stuff up out of whole cloth. That seems to be the implication that you were making here, and I think that maybe goes a little bit further than is appropriate, given that there is a reference to this study in the citation that she does give. Was it she? Yeah. That she does give, but it is not something that can be located when you go to the link there. We still have the study that we know that there's some information out there. The fact that we can't find it automatically doesn't necessarily mean that we're getting BS from the other person. So I think you want to be a little bit careful about making that inference. All right, thank you for your patience lending me here that last speaker.